Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on active learning. My name is Bill Bailey. I'm on the solutions team here at Relativity, and I'm very excited to have this opportunity to discuss active learning with you today. This is part of an ongoing series of webinars that we're going to be doing on active learning, and this will be the first one that we do. I know everyone's busy, has tough schedules, so really do appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join us. So just quick housekeeping, make sure we're up and running technically. If you could just enter yes or no as appropriate here. All right. Things are looking good. We've got a good attendance here today. Excited to see that. All right, I'm going to continue on. It looks like just about everyone is good to go here. So for today's agenda, we're going to provide an overview of active learning, talk about what it is, some of the key components, the basic workflow that it supports, and then we'll dive into an active learning demo. I want to show you the process in Relativity for setting up a project, an active learning project, show you what the review queue looks like and how that works, show you the screens and tools that we have for monitoring your project, and then walk through a validation procedure that we refer to as Elusion testing to show you how to set that up and run that. One other note, I mentioned that this is the first in a series. So we do have, you may have noticed on our website, we have a series of webinars that are entitled Active Learning for Administrators. This webinar has a slightly different name, but the content will be the same. So if you're here today watching this webinar, then the content for the Active Learning for Administrators will be the same content. And so if you're attending today, you get your CLE credits, but you don't get additional CLE credits for the Active Learning for Administrators, but you're certainly welcome to watch that to continue to gain an understanding. This will also be recorded and made available on our website. As I mentioned, CLE credits will be available for those who are attending live. It'll probably take, because there's kind of a big audience here today, it may take a week or two for the CLE credits for everything to get processed. So thank you for your patience there. If you're not seeing anything after a couple weeks, you can notify us, but you should see that showing up in your credits. All right, without further ado, so let's talk about what is active learning. So this is a new technology-assisted review, or TAR, capability that we've made available in Relativity. It provides an efficient and accurate means for classifying your documents, for bucketing your documents. And some of the key kind of principles behind this, things we aimed for, were making sure it's easy to get up and running, to get started with this, that it doesn't require a lot of in-depth monitoring or complicated report interpretation to make it work well. From the reviewer's point of view, it's very straightforward and simple and similar to a standard manual type of review process from their point of view. And other thing to point out that this capability, this active learning tool, exists in addition to our existing RAR, or what we're now calling sample-based learning tool. That tool is still available, but this is an additional capability in addition to the existing RAR tool. As far as when active learning became available, we introduced it in the December 2017 Relativity monthly release. It is part of Relativity Analytics, so if that's part of your subscription, you will have this as of the December release. It's an application, fairly straightforward to install. It does require some configuration of some agents, so you want to consult our documentation just to make sure you've got that going correctly. And then, as we'll see when we go through the demo, this active learning will appear under a new tab that we call Assisted Review. That's kind of our umbrella terminology for our two tools, the pre-existing, the old RAR tool that we still have, and then our new active learning tool. And one other note I meant to say, as questions arise, please feel free to enter them into the question box. I'm going to try to save some time at the end. I'll try to get through the whole presentation here to make sure we cover everything, and then at the end I'll turn back to questions and try to answer your questions. So Support vector machine, this SVM. So this is the engine behind active learning. Some folks may have heard about this. It's kind of a popular technology, but it's a machine learning technique for doing binary classifications. That is taking a set of documents, a set of data, and bucketing it into two categories, two classifications. Typically responsive, non-responsive, relevant, not relevant, yes, no, however you want to define those two binary classification types. And the system's going to learn from the coding decisions that your reviewers make and feed in. So the inputs into the system are those coding decisions as well as the document text. So the machine learning operates off of the extracted text of your documents. So you do need to, it can only be effective, only work on documents that have extracted text. And then the outputs from the system are a prediction or classification, that binary classification, predicted relevant, not relevant, responsive, not responsive, and then every document is ranked on a scale from 0 to 100, with the ranking being an indication of the strength of the system's prediction. So the closer to 100, the higher the number, the stronger the system feels about, or the higher the strength of the prediction that those items with those higher ranks are relevant. The lower, the closer to 0, that means those documents are likely to be not relevant. Things in the middle are that uncertainty zone. So just kind of quickly, briefly, the advantages of SVM. It is a proven technology. It's been used in a variety of applications. It's been out there for a while, field tested. The performance profile is very good. It is efficient with the memory utilization, runs fast. It's optimized for doing this kind of binary classification. Another benefit to using the SVM technology is that due to the nature of it, the way it classifies documents, the way it analyzes the documents, it's fairly robust or resilient to potentially some incorrect or contradictory coding decisions. Every single document doesn't have quite the same impact that you might see with other technologies, other mechanisms, or you might see in an LSI index. And the results, given all this, are as good or better as other technologies. You get high quality results with this approach. So we're very excited about this. We think this is a great technology to drive our active learning tool. As far as the process, the general active learning process, the reviewers are coding documents. They're submitted for training to train the model. The system's going to update that model based on those coding decisions, and then the system will rank all the documents based on the latest build of the model. And as far as the pieces, the components that make up an active learning project, there aren't that many, so we tried to keep this fairly streamlined and easy to understand, easy to set up. So you're going to start with a save search. That's going to define the set of documents that you want to be part of your project, and you're going to build a classification, what we call a classification index. It's a new type of analytics index, and we'll see a little bit more about that in the live demo. So you'll build that classification index using the save search that returns your project documents, and then you'll create an active learning project. You'll point that project to your classification index. There's a one-to-one relationship there, so a classification index can be used in just one project. So you create an index for each project. You'll create your review field or your designation field, which has those two choices, the positive and negative choice, and connect that to your active learning project. And then you're going to specify a permissions group. So this is a standard relativity permissions group that you'll add to your workspace, add users to that group, and that group of users are the folks that you can allow or enable to review documents in the review queues in your active learning project. So we give that kind of extra layer of control. The people, this permission group defines that set of people that you want to be able to review documents in your project. And then, the key piece, kind of the interface with your review team, is what we're called the review queue. So this is where the system serves up or feeds this continuous stream of documents to your reviewers, who then code their documents. And those decisions are fed into the system where it learns from those and builds the model. So not a lot of moving parts to this, which hopefully is nice and hopefully lowers that barrier to adoption. And kind of a little graphic here of how this active learning queue works. So the system builds a model. It's using coding decisions provided by your review team. It's going to build the model behind the scenes, and then the system will stack rank all the documents in your active learning project. And behind the scenes, the system is going to build out this queue or list of documents ordered so that the currently highest ranked documents are at the top of that list. Then as reviewers are working through the system, working in the system in the standard relativity viewer, they'll code a document, hit save and next, and then the system's going to serve up or make available to that reviewer the next available highest ranked document from this queue or this list that's maintained behind the scenes. You can have multiple reviewers working on this. The system will serve up the documents to those reviewers, make sure that a document served up to one reviewer is not served up to another reviewer, and the system manages that process behind the scenes. Also, as the review is going on, the active learning piece of this is the system will periodically take any new coding decisions that have been made since the last model build and then rebuild the model and apply the coding rank scores to the total population of documents in your project, and if necessary, update that list or queue so that it always consists of, at that point, based on the current model, the highest ranked docs, which continue to get fed to your reviewers as they code docs, save, and next. From the reviewer's point of view, this is just a continuous stream of documents. So the system is updating the model, updating the ranks, repopulating the list with the highest ranks. It's doing this in such a way that the reviewer's workflow is not interrupted. They continue to code docs, save and next, code docs, save and next. The basic workflow, so I guess one thing to note here is that the tool is designed to be very flexible. So there are a variety of workflows that you could use this tool, that you could work it into your workflows. In this webinar, we're not going into all the variations and different types of workflows that are possible, but I want to note that the tool is flexible and can support the type of workflow that you need or that your reviewers want. However, there is a basic active learning type of workflow that we talk about that the tool kind of natively supports, and it's outlined here essentially. So reviewers are going to code documents in that review queue. So the system's going to be updating and ensuring that these highest ranked documents are served up to the reviewers. It's this continuous queue or continuous list of documents fed to the reviewers. Then reviewers will continue to coding documents in that queue until essentially the system has the documents the system is serving up are no longer responsive or relevant, or the reviewers are no longer seeing very many or any responsive documents showing up in that queue. And the way this is determined, we'll look at some examples of this. The case admin, person who's managing the project, will be monitoring the charts and graphs that we have available on the project homepage to kind of see where the project is at any moment in time and see when it's reaching this point where the queue has essentially found most of the relevant documents, or it's no longer turning up many or any relevant documents in the queue. And at that point, when that occurs in the project, you have kind of a decision point that you can make. You can continue to have your review team review documents in the queue, continue to work your way through until you've essentially manually reviewed all the documents in your project. That sort of workflow would be using the active learning tool to prioritize a manual review. That's one way you could do it. Or the way to really leverage the tool and provide a lot of value is when you reach this point where the queue is no longer serving up many relevant documents, you can then, and if you'd like to set aside those classified non-responsive documents and not necessarily have the team review all of those non-responsive documents, you can validate that pile, that bucket of non-responsive documents by doing what we call elusion testing on those documents that the system has classified as non-responsive. You'll take a random sample of those docs, or the system will allow you to, and then the reviewers will code those and you will verify the error rate essentially from that random sample. And we'll look at that in a little more detail. But that's kind of the basic flow through the active learning tool. You review, you monitor the results, and then you get to a point where you validate the results, how the system is doing. And then just to kind of illustrate that graphically at a high level, it's this prioritized review queue you're working in and this kind of iterative process of reviewing, monitoring, learning until you reach a point where you run the validation. And if the validation returns results that aren't acceptable, where the error rate is not acceptably low enough, or the elusion rate, then you can go back into the project and continue to iterate, review, monitor, and then validate again until you achieve the results that are acceptable to you and your team. And so here's a quick snapshot of what the project homepage or dashboard looks like. This is in active learning, and we'll look at this in a couple live projects to see how this works. But just in general, this screen is going to show us, you'll see the legend here. The blue in this case is the documents that the review team, coded responsive. We'll also indicate here in yellow the items that the team coded non-responsive. And then here you'll see the purple are the items that the system has classified as rank scored these, but the human reviewers have not yet reviewed those. So this is potentially the big payoff in an active learning workflow where you can set aside that large chunk of non-responsive docs, which we see in a lot of projects. That's the great majority of the documents in the project end up being non-responsive. What you're going to also see, what this illustrates, is that when your project is sufficiently mature, you would expect this middle area to clear out more or less of the non-coded or not set documents. This area around 50, 40 to 60-ish is the rank score that the system is least confident about. So as the system is trained, as the model is trained and learns from the coding decisions, what you'll see in your project is that these two sets of bar graphs will push out to the right and to the left. So your non-responsives, like we're seeing here, will be clumped to the left. Your responsives, if you follow kind of the standard workflow where you're having the team review through the responsives, you'll see the documents that coded responsive on the right, as indicated here in the blue. And then what you're looking for is in this middle area to have that essentially cleared out. These bars, this is a histogram, it's a bar chart that indicates for each rank score how many documents there are at that rank score. Then down below we have another chart that can be very useful. This is our relevance rate chart that shows, it takes this chart will plot a data point for every 200 documents that are reviewed in a review queue and indicate here on this chart the percentage of those documents that were coded responsive. So in the early stages in the project on the far left of this chart, we would expect a fairly high percentage of documents because the system is designed to return documents most likely to be responsive. So you expect the percentage, the rate of documents that are actually relevant in the early stages of the project to be very high, 80, 90, close to 100. But then as a team works through those highly ranked documents, eventually they're going to run out. Eventually the system is going to bubble up those highly ranked documents and exhaust them essentially. And we see that on the right on this chart where we see the relevance rank scores. We plot those dots on the chart. It's getting down closer towards 0%. The very few truly relevant documents are showing up in the review queue, and that's a good thing. That's what you want to see. All right, so we talked about the Elusion Test. This is a capability that's built into active learning that became available in our 9.6 release, which is the February 2018 release. So you have that built into the active learning tool. And as we're saying, it's used to assess the accuracy of the non-responsive classification. You can do an Elusion Test anytime, but typically you'll do it towards the end of your project when you think the system has stabilized around defining that bucket or big pile of non-responsive documents. And the elusion rate, as we've been kind of indicating, is that the percentage of documents classified, the system machine classified as non-responsive that are in fact responsive based on the reviewers reviewing that sample of documents. And anyone who worked with RAR and is familiar with our sample-based learning or RAR tool, this Elusion Test essentially corresponds to the non-responsive overturn rate. If you're not familiar with RAR or don't know what this means, you can just ignore it, but I wanted to point that out. And the Elusion Test, we'll see it has its own queue. So we talked about this prioritized review queue, which is used to train the system. The reviewers code in that queue, that list of documents that's served up. Then when an Elusion Test is run, the system provides an Elusion Test queue to serve up documents from that Elusion Test sample, which will freeze the model and any other queues while the Elusion Test is running. And then reviewers, nice thing is that the reviewers, when they're doing an Elusion Test, their workflow, their experience is really no different. They'll just go into the queue and they will code documents like they had been previously on that same project field, that designation field for the project that the system uses. But when you're doing an Elusion Test, because it is a statistically valid test of the from the non-responses, we don't want the coding to impact the results. So we freeze everything so that the Elusion Test results are an accurate reflection of the snapshot of the project at that point in time. Okay, so I'm going to continue on now to the live demo portion, and folks have entered a bunch of questions. Maybe we'll hit some of those along the way. If not, I'll certainly try to circle back on as many questions as possible toward the end here. So I'll go over to Relativity. I'm in a Relativity workspace. And so what I'd like to walk through here is just show the steps of creating the index in the project, just so you can get a sense of what's involved and how that works, and to kind of get a sense of really how straightforward it is to do. So under Analytics Index, I'll need to create a classification index. So I'll come under Analytics Index, I'll click New Analytics Index, and then on this screen you'll see we have a new field called Index Type. Conceptual would refer to the analytics index that we've had for some time now, our LSI-based index that supports clustering and concept searching and categorization and those kind of things. Those pieces of functionality are still valid and useful. Clustering is still here and still serves a valuable purpose. You would build clustering off of a conceptual index, where for active learning we need to build that off of a classification index. So I pick the type of classification, I pick the searchable set of documents that defines my project universe. And one thing to note here, there is this one-to-one correspondence, so there's one index for a project. So you define your set of documents here in the index, and then we'll point our project to this index. So just I'd give it a name, and I would be good to go. So I'm not going to save this, but I'll go to one that's already created, and let's just take a quick look at the screen here. So after you create an analytics index, the first thing you'll need to do is, or in this case a classification index, you'll need to do a full population and build of that index. So the first time you do a full build of that index. As new documents come into your workspace, rolling loads are totally supported here. You would just, after you load new documents, you'd want to come in here. You do need to come to the index and manually kick off an incremental build. But once you do that, the system will take in the new docs and apply rank scores to the new docs based on the current model state. So that's it. It's pretty straightforward. It's just basically a save search that defines your project universe. The next thing I'll do is I'll go over to my Active Learning tab and create a project. So you see here under this heading of Assisted Review, we have Sample-Based Learning. That's what we used to call, formerly known as RAR. And we have a new Active Learning Projects tab. So I'll just click New Active Learning Project. I'll just give it a name and then select the index. In this case, the indexes you see available here will be classification indexes that are not currently used by any project and that have been fully built. So I'll select one, set, and then we'll select our review field. And this is a single choice field with exactly 2 choices on it. And again, if you've ever used RAR, similar kind of concept there. Now, at this point, the system does require just a single choice field that has exactly 2 choices. So a question that comes up, a little side note here, sometimes folks, if they have pre-coded documents in their project, you can use those, and we'll talk about that a little more in your active learning project. But if you do have them coded on another field that has more than one choice, you may have things like needs further review, technical issue, in addition to responsive, non-responsive. You can just mass code and transfer over your responsive, non-responsive choices to your review field in your active learning project. So you can use pre-coded documents if the team has that. You just want to make sure they're coded on this particular review field. You can express duplicates. We won't go deep into that at this point, but that will suppress any textual duplicate documents. These are not MD5 hash docs, but just based on the text of the doc from being served up in the review queue. And then you'll select a review group. And this is any of the groups that are currently have access to this workspace. You can reuse an existing group if that works for you, or you can set up a specific group for your active learning reviewers and just put the folks that you want to have access to active learning in that group. But all the, as we'll see, the users in this group are not all automatically added to the project. They are not automatically added. So you will, even if you have a whole bunch of users in that group, you still need to say which users you want to have access to the project. Now you can add them all if you want, but you don't have to add all the users. You can be selective there. And then I'll save, and that's pretty much it. So if I weren't talking, I could set up an index and a project in a minute. So this, the system's going to configure, build out the components here behind the scenes, and get my project available for me to start using. And this is what essentially you're going to see. This is kind of a brand new project. Nothing's happened here yet. The system, you'll see there is some processing going on behind the scenes, so things may update a little bit as you go along when you refresh your screen. But what we see here is our two main queues that are available in active learning. The prioritized review queue, where the reviewers are going to do their coding to train the system, and that bubbles up those highly ranked documents. And then the other queue we have available is our Elusion Test queue, which we do later in the project for the validation piece, and we'll look at that later. But really the first thing you're going to do to get your project going is you need to add reviewers. And so this is where I'll click here if you want to click here to add users, so just follow those instructions. And you can, so these are all the users that are in that group that I specified. I can add all the users. I can pick and choose which ones I want. And then I've added those to, made them the folks who will have the ability to access the prioritized review queue, which is not yet enabled. So to enable it, I'll just click Start Review, and then we are off to the races. So really, that's all you need to do from an administrative point of view to set up a project. Very simple, streamlined. You do it a couple times, and it's dead simple. At this point, we don't have, there isn't really like built-in notifications to these reviewers, so what I do as a case administrator, project manager, I would then notify the reviewers, the queue is ready for you to go in and start reviewing documents. And so let's take a look at what that would look like in a kind of an early stage project. So I'm going to hop over to another workspace. And I will go to my active learning projects. And then let's take a look at a project here that's in its very kind of early stages and talk about some of the things we're seeing here on the screen. So we see here the prioritized review queue has been enabled. I see pause review, so I can turn that on and off when needed, that to enable or disable that review queue. But let's look at some of the numbers up here and just explain quickly what they are telling us. Project size, so that's a number of documents that are returned by that search that got indexed in my classification index. And then you'll see up here coded responsive, coded non-responsive. I've got 10 and 15, and then you'll see down below there in the finer print, 10 manually selected, 15 manually selected. So that term manually selected refers to documents that were coded on our project review field. And just as a note here, this little gear widget has your project settings so that you can see which index was being used, what your review field was, the positive choice, and that kind of thing, the review group that you used. One important thing to point out here is, as of right now, as of the current release or the current version, the project details, these settings are not editable. So just as when you create your project, just name it carefully, pick your choices carefully. There aren't a lot of parts, but that's coming down the road, the ability to edit these pieces later. But here's where you can see that project information. All right, so back to what is a manually selected. Manually selected means these documents were coded on that project review, that designation field, but not within not within a queue, not within the prioritized review queue, or not within the Elusion Test queue, or rather not within the prioritized review queue. Okay? So in this case, what I'm seeing here is I just created this project. Reviewers haven't actually coded anything in the review queue yet because I just started, but we do see down here I have my histogram showing that the system has ranked my documents, and the way it was able to do that was because I had supplied, before the project began, I had some pre-coded documents. The team had already coded some documents, and the system can use those to kind of jumpstart the model. So if this is not mandatory, it's not required, you can start with absolutely no documents coded on that field, but it can be helpful, can be very useful to kind of kickstart the project by having the team, especially if they've already done it, code documents, some responsive and non-responsive. Now, the model needs at least 5 responsive and 5 non-responsive documents to build the model. But as soon as you have more than 5 or more of each, the system can do that. So now, in this review queue, the system is essentially going to start with the currently highest ranked documents and start feeding those to the review team in the prioritized review queue. The system will continue to work down the list of highest ranked docs, and it will update that model periodically as additional documents are coded. So that's that active learning part of it. The system, the defaults that are kind of baked in as far as when the model gets built are not configurable at this point, but what happens is the system will rebuild every 20 minutes if new coding decisions are available. It will also, if the entire review team goes out to lunch and stops coding, if there's a 5-minute period of inactivity, it'll look for new documents and rebuild the model if there are any new documents. It's only going to regenerate or rebuild if there are actually new coding decisions to take into account, but at least, or I should say maybe at the most, every 20 minutes. But if there's inactivity, it'll rebuild after 5 minutes of inactivity. So it's staying pretty fresh in terms of the rank scores, and that's important because that's kind of the value behind this thing. It's the system is constantly serving up to the reviewers in the prioritized review queue those currently highest ranked docs. So let's just take a quick look at what, from the reviewer's point of view, what the reviewer experience is when you say, hey, we've got the project set up and the review queue is ready to go. We'll hop over to our Documents tab. And what happens when you create an active learning project, the system's going to automatically generate a view, a document view, with the same name as your project. And that view is how the user will access the review queue for that project. So you see here I picked the view, which has the same name as that project, and then you'll see this blue bar here with Start Review. So Start Review is how you enter the review queue. So the user just comes to this view, clicks the Start Review button, and the system takes that reviewer into the Relativity viewer, where it serves up or feeds to the reviewer here the currently highest ranked doc. And the system, the reviewers will then code the documents based on based on their review. They're going to follow. Since the system is looking at the text, it only sees the text of the document, doesn't see any other metadata, custodians, date ranges, any other coding. So the reviewers need to code it on the face or the 4 corners of the document, whether it's responsive or non-responsive, and then they can save and next. Or if the reviewer is uncertain as to what the proper coding decision should be, they can skip. So if you leave the field uncoded and then just hit save and next, that will register as a skip. It will leave that document uncoded. It won't be used to train the system. You can come back later, so if they confer on the document, the reviewers just make a decision, and then later they can come back and apply the proper coding decision. There is no need for the reviewer to determine whether this document should be used as an example or not. That's not necessary here. It's not even available. nor does the reviewer have to find the text that's relevant and excerpt that. That's not available. It's not necessary. So really a straightforward way for reviewers. They just look at the doc and they just say whether it's responsive or not responsive. Then another thing to point out here, the view, so to get into the queue, so that's where you click the Start Review button. That's where the system behind the scenes it has this list maintained and feeds the highest ranked documents to the reviewers. The view itself here is a standard relativity view. Well, it's a special type of view, but it is basically your standard relativity view. And what it's doing here, you see this list is currently empty. So what the view is returning is the documents that have been reviewed by the currently logged in user. So as the user, the reviewer here, go into that queue, code documents, save and next, code documents, save and next, those documents that have been served up to me will appear in this list. They'll appear in this list if I coded them or if I click save and next, leaving it blank and skip them. It'll register as a skip. So all my coded docs, all my skipped docs will show up in this list as I work. This is a brand new project. I haven't started reviewing anything yet, so it's initially empty. So let's hop back over to our active learning projects. One other thing I'll kind of mention too, the coding layout. So you do need to create a coding layout. The system does not automatically generate a coding layout, but you would create a standard relativity coding layout that has that review field, your designation field that you're going to code on, and that's basically all you need to provide to your reviewers. Now, it's just a standard layout, so if the team does want to do additional types of coding, if they want to do privilege coding or issue coding or any other kind of comments, notes, or needs redactions, whatever fields you want to put on that layout, that's perfectly fine. It's up to the review team. You just need at a minimum the designation field, responsive, non-responsive. All right, so let's look at a project that's kind of a more mature project that the review team has been working on for a while. Click into that. Let's go to the project home page for this project. And this chart is the charts are basically built on the relativity widget mechanism or architecture. So they work very similar to if you work with dashboards on your other tabs and your documents tabs. The legends here, if you click on a legend, it'll temporarily hide that piece. So this kind of lets you drill in and see either just the documents that have been coded, or conversely, I can hide the documents that have been coded and just see the documents that have been classified but not coded. And so this gives you the quick view of the current state of your project in terms of how documents have been ranked. The system, and so here what we're seeing, kind of like that screenshot that we saw, this is looking pretty good. The system has separated the documents, kind of pushed to the left the ones likely to be non-responsive. The review team has worked through documents here on the right. If I actually hide the ones they've coded responsive, really they've worked through. There are no more purples. These are the not set ones that the system, or rather that the humans have not yet coded, really no high-ranked ones that they haven't looked at. So this is leading me to believe that, and again, in the middle, kind of cleared out of the purples or the not sets. So there's very few or almost no documents that the system is uncertain about, no more highly ranked documents that haven't yet been looked at. And so things are looking pretty good. So this is where I can kind of make that determination or decision. Do I want to keep reviewing these documents, in a manual fashion? Do I want to farm these out to other resources and deprioritize them? Or maybe I want to set these aside and not have human reviewers look at those at all, which is that really the way to leverage the tool, get the most benefit and cost savings, in which case you would then move on to the Elusion Test, which we'll look at in just a moment how that works. But that's where we are in this project. We can also kind of verify that. So these two charts, I mean, this screen is kind of simple. It's just got two charts, but I think they provide a lot of information and are very powerful and fairly simple in the way they present their data, which I think is nice. So down below, to kind of confirm or where I am in the project, I see my relevance rate chart here is showing me that, as expected, it started fairly high. and then as the project proceeds, it's harder and harder to find more responsive documents because we've found the bulk of them until the system working its way from the highest rank to the lowest rank is really almost like running out of responsive documents. And that's reflected by a relevance rate that's coming way down and approaching 0. So at this point, this is again another graph, another piece of information that you can use to make that decision. Should I keep coding, or should I at this point maybe run an Elusion test, get my illusion or error rate, and then see if perhaps I'm done with my active learning project, I can kind of move on to the next phase. Some other things I'll point out here as well. We see up in the top right the number that have been skipped, documents that have been skipped. There are ways to get to those documents to review and make sure that decisions are applied. You don't have to apply a decision to them, but if you want to come back and code those documents, that's usually a typical workflow. Let me re-enable everything here. So the data we're seeing on this rank distribution chart here, this histogram chart, is data that's being pulled off the analytics server. And it's kind of aggregate data. It's just saying the number of documents at each rank score that have been have that rank, and broken down by ones that have been coded or ones that have not been coded. And so this gives you that good aggregate overview. We're not saving this data each time the model updates to documents, to relativity. To save it, to continually save this large chunks of data would be very expensive, resource intensive. So we only save the data kind of on demand when an admin user decides that they've reached a point where they do want to save that data, save it off to relativity to make it available on the document side of things to view, search, and work with. And the way you do that is up in the top right here. We have our import ranks or update ranks functionality. And running the update ranks will save the classification, either responsive, non-responsive, however you've labeled your choices on that field, as well as the ranked score for each document. So you get that classification and rank score saved to relativity. The way the rank score is that will be just every document has a rank score, that number will be saved. But as far as the classification, that's determined by your responsive cutoff score. So what you're going to see in a project is when you get this clearing out of the middle and this separation, you're going to enter a score that captures that is the lowest score for the items that are responsive. So here, when I analyze this chart, I was looking down around 60. Seems like the bulk of my responses will be to the right of that, 60 and higher. I'm going to call those are my responsive docs. And then below that is my cutoff for the non-responsives. So in this case, it really isn't super critical the precise number you pick, but you're looking for something that's in the vicinity here that will capture the bulk of your non-responses. So you would enter that. The system's you'll see that the system defaults to a score of 75, but you really want to, that's not really intended to be a suggestion, that's just a pre-filled value. And in this case, 75 would just be way too high, and you may see that in your project as well. So you'll always want to reconsider, you always want to look at your data, your project. Projects will tend to be different in terms of how the separation occurs and where the cutoff score should be. So you want to assess that in the context of your particular project. But then you just click Update Ranks, and the system will go through and save the scores and the designation, the classification to the relativity side. Okay, another thing I'll point out here, we're on this is the Active Learning main page, the Project Home tab. We also have a tab called Review Statistics, and this just gives you some additional information about what's been happening in your project. So you'll see there's a breakdown, some subtabs here for your prioritized review queue docs. So we capture some data, every 200 documents that get coded in the prioritized review queue will capture some stats, how many reviewers were coding for that chunk of 200, that kind of tranche of 200 documents, and what the coding decisions were, the relevance rate. And this is really basically the data that's captured in the graphical format, but here you have it in a table. We'll also capture for you documents that were coded outside of the prioritized review queue. So as we mentioned before, that's this so-called manually selected documents. So you can jumpstart your project. You can use by using pre-coded documents, or intentionally having the team maybe focus and do some focus searches based on keywords or custodian state ranges to try to find some documents and code them up so that the system, when it gets up and running, it's already got that model built and can start serving up documents. In addition, as the project's going on, kind of the default approach is to review documents in your prioritized review queue, and that's fine, that's good. But you can also, some teams do have a preference or desire to do some more kind of targeted searching, focusing in on this custodian and this area, these type of documents, to try to find some important documents. And you can do that. You can manually code documents, these manually selected documents, outside of the project if that suits the team's workflow, if that's useful to the team. You don't have to do that though. You can just code in the prioritized review queue. And then when we look at elusion testing, we capture the data about those there as well. And yeah, just to kind of point out on this chart, the purple every document that we show here, or every data point, every bar, represents the number of documents that the system has ranked at that score. So the system is applying rank scores to both the documents, and you'll see here, so the system applies a rank score to documents that have not been coded. That's kind of what you're wanting it to do. That's the big value of it. But it also applies a rank score to documents you have coded. So you'll see, and there are some, so it's not dependent, the system, uses the SVM technology behind the scenes to classify these documents, and it's not really dependent on any particular one document. So your documents, that you code non-responsive will tend to fall in the lower ranked, but occasionally you'll see an outlier, and that may be okay, or that may be an indication that there might be some coding inconsistency. And if you do see, for instance, if you do see a document that is coded non-responsive but is fairly highly ranked, you might want to access those documents and have reviewers kind of take another look at that. Just verify that, is that really non-responsive? The system thinks, to the system, that looks pretty high, pretty highly ranked. Let's take another look at those documents. Maybe there was some coding error in those. All right, so we looked at the mature project here. We talked about updating the rank scores and the review statistics. The next thing that I'm going to move on to, let me just take a quick look at the questions, see if there's any quick ones I could pick off. So speaking of the update ranks, so that's when you do update the rank scores, that data is saved to fields, document fields, on the document tab on the document side in Relativity. And then you can search for certain documents. You can search for documents within a certain range, documents that are classified in a certain way. You have the ability to search, filter, view, and even make widgets on those fields. And I kind of mentioned early on that if you do, you can have, this supports rolling load, so if additional documents are loaded into your workspace, you would just need to go and to your classification index and do an incremental build on your index, and then those new documents will be folded in to the project. You'll see your project size will get updated to reflect the documents that are currently indexed. The system is also going to take those documents and work them into the model and rank score them so that the new documents will all get rank scored off the bat. So what you'll see is if you've introduced documents that have new concepts, new topical or conceptual data, that maybe some of these are going to be in the middle and the system's uncertain. You may need to do some additional training on those. If they're very similar to documents that have already come in, maybe you'll see those kind of get classified to the right or to the left, high or low, depending on the nature of those docs. All right, so what I want to hop over to now is the elusion testing piece. And I'm going to just show that, slideshow that, just so we don't have to wait for things to build and get up and running. But as you said, elusion testing, that's what you're going to do on the non-responsive, the documents that have not been coded but have been classified as non-responsive. So that could include skipped documents, and we kind of see that down here, not set or skipped. You'll click kind of the start, your Elusion test. Would you like to continue? Yes. The system is going to initialize and build, so it's going to, if you had any other queues that were in progress, it's going to stop them. It's going to freeze the model, so no, the model will build itself one last time to make sure it's up to date, but then as part of the Elusion test startup process, but then after that, no more builds while the Elusion test is active, no more builds of that model will take place. The rank score and classification is frozen for the purposes of conducting the Elusion test, which is generally what you want. You then will click in to set up, and the Elusion test has a few properties you'll need to set. So you need to say that rank cutoff score, what is the minimum number for responsive, so anything below that number is non-responsive. Again, you'll determine that number by your analysis of the screen of the chart. You enter that. You can do a statistical sample, random sample, give your confidence level and margin of error, or you can choose fixed, a specific number, and then the system will calculate or determine the margin of error based on that sample size and the overall population. And you'll add the reviewers. So this is, each queue has its own set of reviewers. So if you want some folks to be reviewers in the training and coding process, but maybe a different or subset of reviewers to have access to the Elusion test queue, you could specify that here by determining the reviewers. Again, they're going to be drawn from that same permissions group, but you could specify which particular users access the Elusion queue, and then it's ready, it's up and running. The Elusion test, this little card here for the queue gives you some information, tells you how many documents have been coded thus far by the reviewers in the queue and how many remain to be coded. We haven't really started coding yet, and how many reviewers you added that made it, that you allowed access to the queue. And then from the reviewer's point of view, it's essentially the same as the prioritized review queue. You'll just instruct the reviewers to go to that view that's named after the project, click Start Review, and then code documents. The main difference being that here, as we saw, we're specifying a specific fixed sample size. So in this scenario, in the Elusion test, when you've coded all the documents in that sample, then the queue basically runs out and you're done coding documents for the Elusion queue. And when that happens, the Elusion test card here on your home page will turn green and have a button that says View the Elusion test results, which we have available to us here. So we'll see based on the coding, so the percentage of documents in that sample that the reviewers coded to be actually relevant are going to appear here as your Elusion rate, the error rate, or the disagreement rate. And then the range based on your margin of error. So it's important to note the range. You may have an estimate of 2%, but given the margin of error, it could be within anything within that range. And then the system's going to show you kind of an estimate of the number of documents in your population based on the Elusion rate, the error rate, how many you would be leaving behind. And again, important to note the range of documents that is represented there based on your margin of error. You see that information down here. And then we call these documents, in this case we created 100 docs in our Elusion test. We put those in a pending state. So they're not included in building the model. We don't want these documents to impact the model and affect the results. It's meant to be a snapshot and a validation or verification assessment of the existing state. If the Elusion rate is acceptably low, you can go ahead and accept these results. By default, we'll update the rank, so we'll update those fields on the document side for you, and your active learning test is essentially, or the active learning project is essentially done, and you can move on to your next phase of working with your documents. If the Elusion test rate, the Elusion rate is not sufficiently kind of low for the nature of the project you're on, you can resume and continue to review documents, train the system, and then you can take as many Elusion tests as you want or need to validate that Elusion rate. And then, as we kind of pointed out, there's an Elusion test subtab on our review statistics page that gives us information about each of the Elusion tests that we've run. All right, so that's the demo. I just want to point out we have some resources here. We have a couple other webinars that are posted on our website. You have links here. Everyone will receive this deck and have access to these, but these are on our website currently. We also have a white paper that's pretty good information on active learning in relativity assisted review. And then of course we have our standard documentation sites, so I encourage you to consult those. And then, as I mentioned before, we have an ongoing series called Active Learning for Administrators. It's the same content as this, but that will be offered probably twice a month. It's scheduled for going forward. So if you or others are interested, we encourage you to spread the word and join them. But again, you get your CLE credit just for one of these because they're all the same. And this webinar will be posted as well on the website. All right, so with that, let me turn to questions and see if I can get through as many as possible here. I'm going to kind of go through and address as many of these as I can. We mentioned installation. The other thing you need to do is configure the managers, agents, along with that. Yeah, I think there are other webinars. If you attended those, I think you're going to get credit for if you attended live, you'll get credit for other webinars, but it's just this series of active learning for administrators. You don't get kind of double credit. There's some questions about, let's see, emails and threading, and also, let's see, yeah. So in the queue, the system is not looking at documents in terms of threads or families. It's serving up the documents that are the highest ranked documents based on the text contained in those documents. So that's really the most efficient way for a review team to work through a set of documents, is let the system determine what the next highest ranked document is. At the end of the project, then, you can pull in families or do threads if you need to, which you typically would, at least for the family's point of view. But the system is not serving up families, it's serving up the highest ranked document. Now you do have in the viewer, the related items pane will show families if a reviewer does need to view the family members to help make the decision or get the context. That's possible, but viewing documents that aren't served up in the queue is generally just going to slow things down, but it is allowed, it is possible. And some questions about what comes up in the queue, and just generally speaking too, a document will never be served up, a coded document, or a document that's only uncoded documents get served up in the queue, and we wouldn't serve up the same document to more than one reviewer. So one reviewer gets it, it's not going to be served up again. Even if they skip it, it won't be served up again. It's tied to that reviewer in a skip state. If you have the suppressed duplicates on, we don't serve up duplicates, but otherwise, if you're not suppressing duplicates, those just get served up like any other document. Some questions about coding inconsistency. Now, it is important. I mean, generally speaking, you want your coders to be on the same page, to be reviewing consistently. You're going to get the best results, that will be most efficient. It'll train the model quickest and let you work through. But the system is tolerant of some inconsistencies, some incorrect coding decisions. That's not going to ruin your results. So it's a little bit more robust that way, but certainly consistency is desired. The documents, how does the system rank a document? That kind of goes back to the SVM, support vector machine algorithm, that's being used behind the scenes. We do have one of those webinars for anyone who's interested in really getting into the details of how SVM, the algorithm, works in a kind of very technical way. There's a great webinar that's listed there on the resources page that goes into more like the technical details, even the mathematical details of how a rank score is determined based on that hyperplane that's created. Let's see. Yeah, and the rank score, is meant to be kind of a relative score that indicates kind of the strength of the prediction. So, the higher to the right, the larger number, the stronger the prediction is that is responsive. The lower the number, the stronger the prediction is that that's non-responsive. Yeah, and as far as like determining when most of the relevant documents have been found, that's kind of looking at is the middle part cleared out? Are there not many documents in the uncoded documents in the high ranked? And then is that relevance rate chart getting low, getting closer to 0? Some questions about incorporating like the LSI, the conceptual index or tools to help either QC your results or to work in conjunction with active learning. That's certainly possible. And certainly something that you could do and may be valuable. So yeah, you can definitely experiment with using the LSI model. Now they're two different algorithms. You know, they're not going to produce identical results, but that could be a way to kind of cross-reference, triangulate, and verify to see where there might be disagreement. That could be an area that you might want to explore for QC purposes. I will continue to answer a few more questions for folks who can hang on. We're at 2 o'clock, but I'll spend a few more minutes here going through some questions just so I can get through as many as possible, and then we'll kind of wrap up. The sampling process for documents in the SVMQ versus stratified sampling in RAR. Yeah, so that is a kind of a major difference between like RAR or sample-based and the active learning tool. The active learning tool for the prioritized review queue, it's not sampling per se, it's just it's ranking the documents, it's building the model, ranking the documents, and then just starting with queuing up and ordering the documents by rank score, and then making the highest ranks documents available to the reviewers, feeding those to the reviewers. So it's not sampling in that sense in the prioritized review queue. Elusion test, that is sampling because that's the goal there. You want to sample from a larger population. But the review queue, the prioritized review queue, is that continuous stream of highly ranked documents. If you're going to do, generally when new documents come in, question about new documents come in the build of the index, usually incremental is fine. You would do a full build if you have removed if you want to remove documents. So if you're adding incremental, if you've removed some docs, you want to do a full. In addition, if the text has changed at all, if you had some bad extracted text or something and you updated that, you would need to do a full build to get any new text. But otherwise, just adding new docs, you just do an incremental build. Yeah, another question about the classification index. So the documents coming in, there is a 30 meg limit. So it is a good idea just for housekeeping purposes to have your the search that you're using for your classification index, that safe search, exclude docs over 30 meg and then exclude docs that have no text, because in either case those documents just aren't going to be classified. So that's a good thing to exclude those. 30 megs though will error out and be excluded. That suppressing dupes question about how that's done, that it's not like a hash value, it's not an MD5 or SHA-1 hash, it's the word, it's comparing the text, kind of the bag of words that's left over in the index for a document, which will exclude numbers, stop words, and that kind of thing, and then just comparing if the text is identical. The suppressing duplicates, so some more questions on suppressing duplicates. Probably don't have time to go deep into that now, but in general, you know, you would have, if you suppress duplicates, they're not going to get coded by the reviewers in the queue because they're suppressed, so you will have to circle back and handle those documents. So if you do want to work through the review queue to find all your responsive documents, you probably want to strongly consider not suppressing the duplicates or doing deduplication prior to your project. To the extent you can actually remove duplicate documents and do some of that deduplication up front, you know, your review process will be similar. But if you do need eyes on all your documents, your responsive docs, before they go out the door, then you do need to kind of circle back on those duplicates. And the suppressed duplicates just looks at the text. It's not looking at any other fields. So in your save search that you feed into the index, similar to the LSI index or DT search index, you want to specify your extracted text. Whatever field is returned by that search, that save search, that's the data that's going to get indexed. So typically, you just want that search to have your extracted text field. That's what you want to get indexed, not other fields. And manually selected docs, just as a reminder, that's documents that the team coded or that were coded on the review field for the project, but that weren't served up in the queue. So, you know, that's what you can do that. Any document that's coded, the system is kind of always listening. If you're not running an Elusion test, if you're in the just in the standard mode of your active learning project, the system is kind of always looking for new coding decisions on that review field, which is good, but also means you want to be careful and intentional about that. Any coding that occurs in that field is going to be fed into the system and update the model, which it's often what you want. That's a good thing. Rebuild times, I don't think we have metrics on, like, for millions of docs what the how long it takes to build a classification index, but I think we're working on that, so please stay tuned, and hopefully we'll be publishing some data on that in the near future. You can another question about the designation field. It is binary, so the field, you know, it has to have exactly two choices, but you can have, it could be, in addition to being responsive, non-responsive, you can do like hot, not hot. You can do any type of, any category that you want that you can put into two buckets, is and is not, basically positive, negative. Okay, well, there are a few more questions here. I'm going to take a look at these, and I'm going to try to get back to all the folks who have entered questions and get a response out to you on those. But thank you all very much for attending. Hope you got some good information about that, and good luck and using active learning tools. Thank you.